Okay, so are you ready for this?
Oh, yeah, always.
Today, we're going to deep dive into the world of global business,
Awesome.
which I think is something that affects all of us,
Yeah, absolutely.
um, but maybe in ways we don't even realize.
Definitely.
So we're going to talk about five kind of big concepts.
Okay.
We're going to look at labor costs, offshoring,
Okay.
infrastructure, tariffs, and trade agreements.
Wow. That's a lot to cover.
It is a lot to cover.
Yeah.
But, imagine if you were like the CEO of a company
Right.
and you're making decisions that span continents.
Yeah.
What would you need to know?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Let's start with labor costs.
Okay.
Now, this is something I think, people hear all the time.
Right.
But it's really interesting when you think about,
Yeah,
how much it actually impacts business decisions.
for sure.
So, I guess at a basic level,
Yeah.
labor costs are basically just the total amount of money that companies
Right.
pay to their employees.
Yeah, that's the simple definition.
Right. But it gets complicated.
It gets really complicated because, companies are always trying to minimize costs, right?
Right.
And labor is often one of the biggest expenses that they have.
Makes sense.
So they're constantly looking for ways to, reduce those costs.
Right. And that's where things like offshoring come in.
Exactly.
And offshoring, just so everyone's on the same page,
Yeah,
is basically when a company moves some of its operation
Right.
to another country.
exactly. And often that's driven by those lower labor costs that we were just talking about.
Wow.
A company might move its manufacturing to a country
Yeah,
where wages are lower, for example.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered,
Yeah.
why are so many clothes made overseas?
Right.
And I guess a lot of it comes down to labor.
A lot of it does come down to labor costs, but it's not just about finding the cheapest labor, right?
Mhm.
There are other factors involved, like the availability of skilled workers,
That's true.
the quality of the infrastructure,
Yeah, that makes sense.
and even government regulations.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just a simple equation.
Not at all. It's
Yeah.
a complex web of factors.
And I know a lot of tech companies have offices in India, for example.
Yeah, that's a classic example of offshoring for software development.
All right.
They can find highly skilled software engineers there
Yeah,
at a lower cost than in, say, Silicon Valley.
makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about labor costs.
Yeah.
We've talked about offshoring.
Uh-huh.
Let's move on to infrastructure.
Okay, so infrastructure is basically the basic physical systems that a country or
Yeah.
a region has in place to support its economy.
Okay.
So we're talking about things like transportation.
Like roads and bridges.
Exactly. Roads, bridges, airports, seaports.
Uh-huh.
Also things like communication systems,
Okay,
energy grids, and even water supply.
got it. So why is infrastructure so important for businesses?
Well, businesses rely on infrastructure to operate smoothly. Think about it. If a company can't transport its goods efficiently
Yeah.
because the roads are bad, that's going to add to their cost.
Right, it's going to slow them down.
Exactly. Or if there are constant power outages,
Yeah.
that's going to disrupt production
Right.
and again, increase costs.
Makes sense.
So having a reliable infrastructure is crucial.
So it's kind of like the foundation of a house.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. You can't build a strong house on a weak foundation.
Right, right. So I guess different countries have different levels of infrastructure.
Absolutely. Some countries have very modern and efficient infrastructure,
Yeah.
while others have infrastructure that's outdated
Right.
and in need of improvement.
And that can affect where companies decide to do business.
It definitely can. I mean, would you want to set up a factory
Yeah,
in a place where the power goes out all the time?
probably not.
Or where the roads are so bad that you can't get your products to market?
That's true. So I guess infrastructure is something that companies really have to think carefully about.
Yeah, it's a major factor in their decision-making process.
So let's talk about something else that's really important.
Okay.
And that's tariffs.
Tariffs. Yeah, tariffs are basically taxes
Okay.
that are imposed on goods that are imported
Right.
or exported from a country.
So if I'm buying something from another country,
Uh-huh.
I might have to pay a tariff.
You might. It depends on the product
Okay.
and the countries involved.
Got it.
Governments use tariffs for a variety of reasons.
Okay.
Sometimes it's to protect domestic industries.
So if a country makes a lot of cars,
Right.
they might put a tariff on imported cars to make them more expensive.
Exactly. That makes it easier for their own car companies to compete.
Right, right.
Sometimes tariffs are used to generate revenue for the
Okay.
government.
So, like, it's a way to raise money,
Exactly.
and then sometimes it's used as, like, a bargaining chip.
Yeah, in trade negotiations.
So it's a pretty powerful tool.
It can be a very powerful tool, but it can also have unintended consequences.
Like what?
Well, for example, if a country puts a tariff on a particular good,
Yeah.
that can lead to higher prices for consumers.
Oh, right. Because those tariffs get passed on to us.
Exactly, and that can make it harder for people to afford those goods.
So tariffs are definitely something that consumers should be aware of.
They should. It's important to understand how they can impact the prices of things.
And finally, let's talk about trade agreements.
Okay, so trade agreements are basically contracts
Okay.
between two or more countries
Uh-huh.
that set the terms of trade between them.
So, like, what are they allowed to trade?
Yeah, what they can trade, how much they can trade,
Yeah.
and at what prices.
Got it.
The goal of trade agreements is to make trade easier
Okay.
and more beneficial for all the countries involved.
And how they do that?
Well, they often involve things like reducing or eliminating tariffs,
Okay.
streamlining customs procedures,
Right.
and establishing common standards.
So, like, it's kind of like a rule book
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
for how countries are going to trade with each other.
Exactly.
So, like, what are some examples of trade agreements?
Well, one of the most well-known is the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA,
Oh, right.
which replaced NAFTA.
Okay.
There's also the European Union,
Right.
which is a trade bloc
Okay.
that includes many European countries.
And these trade agreements can have a big impact on businesses.
They can open up new markets for businesses,
Okay.
reduce costs,
Yeah.
and make it easier to do business internationally.
So I guess it's important for businesses to understand these trade agreements.
It is. They need to know what the rules are
Right.
and how they can benefit from them.
Wow. So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have. We've gone from labor costs to offshoring
Right.
to infrastructure, tariffs, and trade agreements.
And it's all interconnected.
It is. It's all part of this complex global business landscape.
And it's something that affects all of us.
It does, whether we realize it or not.
So what do you think the future of global business holds?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
I think we're going to continue to see businesses operating more and more globally.
Makes sense.
And I think technology is going to play an even bigger role in that.
Right.
You know, with e-commerce and digital marketing,
Right.
businesses can reach customers all over the world.
That's true. So it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve.
It is. It's a really exciting time to be involved in global business.
Well, thanks for taking us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
It's been really informative.
Glad to hear it.
And yeah, I think we all learned a lot.
I hope so.
So to all of our listeners out there,
Yeah,
thanks for tuning in.
absolutely.
And we'll see you next time
See you later.
for another deep dive.
Bye.